When you're holding somebody's ears shut, you can't cover up your own. I didn't realize that for a long time. I'm writing this to get it out of my system, off my chest so to speak. It's a Hail Mary effort for sure, but maybe I'll get some good advice out of this. My big brother Bron used to come into my room late at night when I was little. The visits seemed random but would happen at least once every 3 months. I was and still am a very light sleeper, so I would wake up instantly whenever he'd open the door. He would place his finger over his lips before sitting down on the bed with me. Then, he'd pull me close and place his hands over both my ears. We would sit like this for around an hour each time before he would eventually let go of me and go back to his own room. I'd try to ask him why he kept doing this, but he never told me directly. The older I got, however, the more everything appeared to fall into place. There was only one rational explanation, and that had to have been related to our parents. Mom and Dad were a seemingly happy couple. They never fought, argued or even swore in front of my older brother and me. But maybe that's what they were doing at night, and that's what Bron didn't want me to hear. So I started looking for signs, I suppose. Tension between my parents when us kids weren't in the same room with them, well-hidden bruises, broken objects around the house, any kinds of marks a physical altercation could have left. I was spying on them every free minute of my day, but I found nothing. All was perfectly fine and normal. Obviously, I was glad Mom and Dad actually did get along as well as they made it seem, but with that possibility ruled out, the mystery of Bron's visits remained unexplained. I could have just asked Bron what he was doing. But that's not really how a kid's mind works, or at least it wasn't how my mind worked. The way I saw it, I had to make an effort to figure this out on my own, like all those clever young detective nerds on TV. I really did feel a little like an investigator or a secret agent of sorts. That's childhood innocence for you. For a long time, my search for answers yielded no results. I never quite gave up on it though. Over the years, yes, this went on for years, I got better at sneaking around the house unnoticed. I learned how to walk without making any sound whatsoever. I would creep up to Bron's bedroom late at night sometimes and peek in through the keyhole. From what little I could tell by watching him, he never got up to anything suspicious either. So if it wasn't Mom and Dad fighting and if Bron wasn't being crazy, what was going on? By the way, Bron and I are roughly 3 years apart. I don't know when I started investigating, but I do know how old I was when I finally found out. 11. I was 11 years old and Bron was 14. During that time, I had taken a new approach to the whole matter. I was aware Bron would visit me every other month, which meant that on these special nights, something happened in our house or at least an earshot of it. Bron obviously knew and had kept it from me, very successfully thus far. However, if I were to get a head start on him, I might have a chance of finding out. All I'd have to do was hide somewhere around the house, somewhere outside my room where Bron wouldn't find me. Of course I didn't know where this weird mystery thing would be transpiring, so I had to pick hiding spots at random and just hope I'd be lucky enough to get a good view. If not, I knew I'd at least hear it. The downside of this plan was that since Bron's visits didn't come at a set schedule, I'd have to hide every single night and just wait for something to happen. Worse yet, I needed to be extremely cautious. If I got caught once, my entire mission might end up being compromised. If Bron knew I was onto him, he'd probably lock me up in my room from then on or something. Either way, there were 2 hiding spots I deemed suitable. I decided to switch between them every night to maximize my chances of witnessing the event. One was the cupboard underneath the kitchen sink. I've always been flexible, so even as a lanky 11-year-old, I could fit myself in there without any difficulties. Then, I would simply keep the door open a crack and peer outside. From there, I had an excellent view of the kitchen and half of the dining room. The other spot was on top of the tall closet in the upstairs hallway. This lovely piece of old furniture was placed facing the staircase that led up to our bedrooms from the living room downstairs. It was where we stored all of our blankets, bedsheets and towels, so any one of us could simply walk out from their room or the bathroom to take what they needed. Very accessible. The good thing was that there would always be blankets lying on top of the closet too, so if I hid underneath those, I'd have a good view of almost the entire living room as well as the front door. On top of that, with a bit of quiet maneuvering, I'd be able to tell what was going on in the hallway as well. The only thing I could not see at all was the kitchen and the dining room. I switched between those two spots every night. I'd be extremely sneaky about it. I would wait for Braun to come by and say goodnight like he always did and wait until he'd return to the living room. He'd usually stay up much longer than me and watch TV downstairs with my parents. Once I was sure nobody was paying attention, I'd either crawl down the stairs and into the kitchen cabinet on all fours or go out into the hallway where I would use the smaller chest of drawers beside the big closet as a sort of stepladder to then hide under the blankets on top of it. In the meantime, I had also acquired the key to my room and would lock it from the outside as soon as I would leave for my hiding place. With that I risked not being able to make a fast and silent return to my bed when in need, but it would also buy me time when Braun would inevitably come to cover my ears one of these nights. Surely, he'd think I'd locked myself in because I wanted privacy and his first course of action would be to find a way into my room instead of assuming I was elsewhere in the house and going around to look for me. So you see, I was very calculative with the way I went about my plan. And then, the night came and it finally happened. I was hiding on top of the closet. I'm not sure if I should be lucky I did. On the one hand, if I'd been hiding in the kitchen, I would have seen little of what went down, but on the other hand, I really wish I hadn't seen half of what went down. It started with me waiting for what felt like hours. Maybe it really was hours, who knows. I could hear the TV humming away downstairs but nobody was talking. Kind of odd. Suddenly, I heard the front door being unlocked. In came my mother, wearing high heels, a short red dress and eye-catching hoop earrings. I had never seen her dressed up like that and I hadn't even known she was going out that night. She was laughing loudly, her bright red lipstick shining as she switched on the light in the hallway. She wasn't alone. A man followed her inside. He was about the same age as her, dressed in a nice gray suit. I had never seen him before but he was holding her hand. She pulled him into the hallway after her. He was laughing as well and I could tell he was drunk. Mom shut the door behind them, smiling widely at the stranger. The TV was switched off. Dad and Braun emerged from the back of the living room, making their way into the hallway. The stranger, who was just taking off his coat, halted. Turning to my mother, he slurred, "Hey, I thought you'd be alone." She gave him a sweet grin and shrugged before turning and pressing herself up against the door, locking it behind her back. Wow, that's all the man could say before Dad wrapped his arm around him from behind and pressed his hand over his mouth. He was holding something white, like a handkerchief maybe. He stuffed it into the guy's mouth. The stranger tried to reach up and remove Dad's arm, but my father didn't let go. I stared at them in shock, unable to move. This wasn't really happening, was it? "Just stay still now, buddy," Dad said in a calm voice. The stranger whimpered through the gag and slowly lowered his arms. "Braun. Go take care of your sister." My older brother, who had been watching the scene with mild interest, nodded and proceeded to climb the staircase. I lowered my head, allowing the blanket I had been peeking out from to swallow me whole. Braun's footsteps moved up the stairs and towards my bedroom door. I heard him press down on the handle to find that the door remained in place. My brother gave a low hum as he tried it again, and then again and again. The handle creaked quietly in protest. I shifted on top of the closet and peered out to the side. As expected, Braun was standing outside my room, a look of alarmed confusion on his face. He raised his hand and ever so gently knocked on my door. "April?" he uttered. "April, are you asleep?" No response came from the empty room. "April?" he repeated in a low voice. "Can I come in, please?" Still nothing, of course. I stayed as silent as I could, hidden safely beneath the sheets. Meanwhile, the stranger was weeping quietly downstairs, his voice muffled by the gag Dad had stuffed into his mouth. My parents were staying still, like they were listening in on what was happening upstairs. After some thinking, Braun raised his fist and banged it against the door with such force the whole floor seemed to shake. I winced. My older brother then leaned against the door, pressing his ear to it. After a few seconds, he shook his head and went back downstairs. "She's locked herself in. She seems to be asleep in there though." "Well, it was to be expected," Mom muttered. "Girls want their privacy. We couldn't have made you keep barging in there anyways. We're gonna have to talk to her soon." I turned in my spot to look down into the living room again. What did she mean, they were going to talk to me? Were they planning on letting me in on whatever sick scheme this was? Brown seemed to know all right. I still didn't want to believe my eyes. Maybe, I thought, maybe this was all just a setup. They'd seen me sneak around and this was my punishment. Maybe this guy was just an actor. Part of me was tempted to simply come out of my hiding spot and tell them I'd learned my lesson, but I wasn't actually naive enough to think that was the truth. I knew very well what was happening, deep down I knew, I just didn't have the strength to accept it. My disbelief was protecting me from the cruelty I was in the process of witnessing. "What do we do with this one?" Brown asked, pointing at the gagged man restrained by my father's arms. "What we normally do," Dad replied. "Just quieter." With that, he grabbed the stranger by the neck and slammed his head down against the banister. It collided with a loud thump. I pressed my hand over my mouth. The man's head left a red stain on the wood and his body fell limp, folding over the staircase. Dad picked him up and proceeded to drag him off into the part of the living room I couldn't see. Mom smiled at Bron and patted his shoulder. "Sweetie, can you wipe that off for me? Come join us when you're done." My brother nodded and while Mom walked after Dad, he went into the kitchen. He returned with a wet cleaning rag and started to work on the stain. Afterwards, he made his way back to our parents'. I had no idea where they had gone exactly, but I figured it was the basement. They had probably exited through the back door. Once everything was silent, I slid off the closet and went back into my room. I laid down in bed and stayed there until morning, despite being wide awake. I didn't run for the police or a neighbor. I didn't tell anyone a thing. In fact, I didn't talk at all. I would not open my mouth to utter a single word for 4 entire weeks after that night. At school, I didn't participate. I didn't talk to my friends or my brother or my parents. It was obvious to my family that something was wrong and they'd try to get me to tell them, but I stayed quiet. I don't know why exactly I didn't speak. Sometimes I actually wanted to, but when I'd open my mouth, my mind would suddenly empty and it felt like I had completely forgotten every word that had ever existed. That entire time, I knew I had to tell somebody, but I didn't know how. I was scared that the cops wouldn't take me seriously. I figured maybe I could turn to a teacher first, but I was afraid they wouldn't believe me and tell my parents. 4 weeks later, the police were at our door. I hadn't been the one to inform them and I felt terrible about it, but I couldn't have been happier. I saw them from my window as their cars pulled up outside our house. I started to cry then. I knew I should have said something sooner and at the time, the guilt was killing me. With every day that I had kept my mouth shut, I had been scared they would bring home another one, that someone else was going to die and that it'd be my fault for not doing anything. They didn't get anyone else before they were caught though. It was over and I was so damn happy. I'm not sure how exactly the police or whoever was on it at the time found out my parents were the ones responsible for 23 disappearances, and not just around town either. They had lured in both men and women, killed them and stripped them of their cash and belongings. Those were just the ones they had definitive proof of, but I genuinely hope that was all. Brown and I grew up apart from our mother and father. After what I'd seen, I didn't mind too much. Ever since that night, I had been scared to death of them. Quite literally, seeing as I'd been walking on eggshells in fear of what they'd do to me if they found me out or I upset them. Brown was never punished for helping them or anything. I'm not even sure if they knew he did so at all. We both got counseling and stuff though. It was a really difficult time for me, for both of us, so I'm sorry for not wanting to talk about it any more than this. I hope you understand. Either way, I already mentioned I'm writing this because of something that happened recently. It took a long time for Bron and me to re-establish somewhat of a trusting relationship. I realized that he had been greatly impacted by the things he had seen. I don't know when Mom and Dad started using him to assist them, but I was certain he had been like me, a scared child who hadn't known what else to do. Maybe it had started with them simply telling him to cover my ears and he had investigated them himself only to find out about the killings, and then Mom and Dad had sucked him in. I had been afraid of him too, for a long time actually, but that's how we slowly started talking again. Nowadays, we're very close, or at least we were until yesterday. Brown and I had met up for lunch. We got ourselves takeout and ate at his place since that gave us the chance to catch up in private. And that's when he made a suggestion. "You're really pretty these days," he began, giving me a once-over. "You look a lot like Mom." Maybe even better than her, actually. Where are you going with this? I asked, uncertain and a little uncomfortable with being compared to my mother. You ever think about how Mom and Dad got caught? Honestly, I don't want to think about them at all. Of course, but I was wondering. You know how they did it, right? She lured them in and Dad would do this whole ambush thing. He paused, tilting his head. You don't make as much as you should, neither do I, work sucks. And there's people who really have more money on them every day than we make in a month, and most of the time, those are huge assholes. He said this so casually it sounded like he was telling me about the weather forecast. I didn't say anything. I simply got up and walked out the door, not stopping to put on my coat. I simply took it outside with me. That was yesterday and we haven't spoken since. I don't know what to do. Ever since then, I've been asking myself if he'd played a bigger role in all of this. The thought itself seems outlandish, but the more I wonder, the more I feel like there might be something to it. If anyone who reads this has any idea on what course of action to take here, please share it with me. I'm at a loss, and I'm scared. There's this one thing I keep thinking about in particular. I mentioned it at the start of this post too. Bron would only ever hold my ears shut, meaning he himself would hear everything. I never noticed him showing any kind of distress at it, though. xwww.reddit.com web link